How's it going? Today we're going to talk about Napoleon Bonaparte and his stories. So, some people may think Napoleon wrote a romance novel. His story is part truth and part embellishment. In 1795, Napoleon wrote a short story, only 9 pages, so not a novel, titled Céline et Eugène. Historians generally agree that it's in part a reflection of a relationship he had shared with Eugene Desiree Clary, a relationship that was ended as he wrote the story. The story itself wasn't published while Napoleon was alive, but multiple copies were preserved in varying conditions by friends, relatives, and fans of the great man, and the full story was eventually recompiled from various copies. Napoleon, it turns out, had always had something of a writer aspect. He once stated that he was writing a poem about Corsica, which either way was never finished or never shared. At the age of 17, he was encouraged to publish a history of Corsica, which he had written, but by this time, he got a bookseller interested. Napoleon, now a soldier, was called off to battle. Oh, the times had changed. The emperor was not only a writer, he was also his own worst critic. At the age of 17, Napoleon tried for a prize from the Academy of Lions by writing an essay on the topic, "What are the principles of the institutions, by application of which mankind can be raised to the highest pitch of happiness?" Many years later, Napoleon was handed the copy of this essay that had been kept in the Academy's records. He read the first few pages, then tossed it nearest to the fire. He read a few pages, and then he tossed it into a fire, as all critics do. In 1798, while in Egypt passing through Syria, Napoleon and some of his cavalry took advantage of a quiet afternoon in the ebb tide of the Red Sea to walk across the opposite side of the coast, on a dry seabed, where they visited some springs called the Wells of Moses. Curiosity satisfied the group of men, returned to the Red Sea to make their way back across. By that point, it became dark, and after that, they began to cross the tide, started to come in. Unable to see where to go in the dark, the water was rising, obscuring the path they had earlier forwarded. Napoleon ordered his men to form a circle around him facing out, like a spoke-out wheel. Then each man rowed forward until they found themselves started to swim, at which point they were to turn and follow the man closest to them while still riding on solid footing. They all escaped the Red Sea drenched but unharmed. Having nearly been washed away like Pharaoh, who caused Moses' disappearance centuries before, Napoleon had to observe this situation, would have furnished all the preachers of Christianity with a magnificent text against me, he said. One story now told is infamous. While Napoleon and his troops were in Egypt between 1798 and 1801, he had his men test their cannon skills by shooting at the Sphinx. This is, of course, the reason of the monolith has no nose. This story is easily refuted, as another Frenchman, Frederick Louis Norden, published an illustration of the Sphinx in 1755 that shows its nose was already missing, which was way before Napoleon was born. The tale of Napoleon shooting the Sphinx appears to have only begun to be told in the start of the 20th century. The more commonly expected story by historians about how the Sphinx lost its nose is that in 1380, a fantastical Muslim leader caused injuries to the head. Muslim warriors also believed to have used a target shooting practice, meaning it had been shot about 500 years before Napoleon was even there. Sorry, Napoleon, that would have been a great expertise in history. In 1799, in May, Napoleon needed a retreat from the town of Jaffa in Egypt and had sent most of his wounded men ahead with necessary arrangements for their safety. But somehow, between 7 of the 30 men were sick with bubonic plague and could not be transported with the rest of the army for the fear of spreading the infestation. Napoleon realized leaving his men behind would allow him to be captured by the Turks, who had the reputation of torturing prisoners to death. So Napoleon proposed to the doctor in charge that it would be less cruel to end their lives of the sick men with a large dose of opium, a suggestion which the doctor refused to act on. In the end, Napoleon left a rear guard to protect the men, some of whom were found and rescued by the English after the retreat. This little episode exploded into public relations fiasco for Napoleon. The story grew until it became a common belief that Napoleon had in fact performed the poisoning on several hundred men in Jaffa. French officers and soldiers believed it to be true and said as much as when captured, most of the English population believed the stories as well. The poisoning story followed Napoleon for the rest of his life. In 1804, Napoleon commissioned a painting by Antoine Jean Cros that displayed the soon-to-be emperor visiting the sick men at Jaffa in an attempt to quell the story of the poisoning, which was current in the British press. Gros' work is now considered the first masterpiece of Napoleon artwork, and was influential in the establishment of the neoclassical school of art, which is here, right now. Here's the artwork. Cleo doesn't live anymore. As the story goes, workmen at Paris Museum sometime in the 1940s dumped the contents of a mummy case into the sewers while the museum was being cleaned out. It was only later that it was realized that the case was being used to store the remains of Cleopatra, brought back from Egypt by Napoleon Bonaparte. The myth was mentioned in 1996 in a book called Oops, a stupefying survey of the goofs, blunders, and botches, great and small. The myth has only one major flaw. No one has yet found the burial place of Cleopatra. There is only one flaw of the book. Nobody has found Cleopatra, so no museum can claim that have lost her remains. The myth takes advantage of a general belief that Napoleon looted Egypt while he was there between 1798 and 1801. In fact, though Napoleon did attempt to take the country over by military force, he also brought 150 savants, scientists, engineers, and scholars, especially so that he could examine, record, detail monuments, artifacts, and so forth of the history of Egypt. Though Napoleon's political takeover Egypt failed, the scholarly study he resulted in a massive series of books about Egypt's richest history throughout Europe. So ironically, Napoleon's scholarly interest may have resulted in Egypt being looted by every country other than France. Oui, bien, French. Way to go. It has been reported that in June 1800, just before the Battle of Marignano, one of Napoleon's generals urgently requested his attention. General Christian Michael de Saint-Angelo entered the emperor's tent looking somehow forlorn, handed Napoleon an envelope that informed him that it contained his will and that he wished Napoleon's act to his executioner. Steganel had awoken from a dream just a bit earlier, which he saw himself rushed forward into battle and confronted by a Croatian warrior in armor who was transformed into an image of death. The general was therefore convinced that he would die in upcoming conflict. Sure enough, Napoleon received a report on the following day that Stengel had died in the battle with a very large Croatian warrior, probably about 6'5" or so. The strange event haunted Napoleon the rest of his life. As reflected in his dying words at St. Helena years later, Stengel, hurry, attack, he said. The particular myth has 3 strikes against it. First, Stengel died at the Battle of Mandeva, 4 years before Napoleon went to Mangalore. Second, Napoleon's last words are still a matter of debate. No academic person has asserted that Stengel, hurry, attack is a possibility of his last words. 3 days prior to Napoleon's death, while in a fever, he did call out Stengel, as well as some of other former generals, to attack on imaginary enemies. But this is far cry from the myth asserts. Finally, the earliest mention of the incident in 1890, around 100 years after his death happened. Very interesting story. Now, I'm curious what you think about this in the comments below. While Napoleon married Josephine, he also gained a stepdaughter, Horosmane, whom he loved and esteemed his own child. When she reached the right age, Josephine decided to try to marry her to Napoleon's brother, Louis. This was partially because Josephine felt that Napoleon's brother was working to turn her husband against her. So having one of those brothers against her son-in-law would help quell the problem. Secondly, Josephine had unable to give Napoleon a heir, but was sure that if Holstein were to have a boy with Bertman blood in his veins, Napoleon would declare the child to be his own as the throne. It took some creative argument, but in 1802, Josephine finally got Napoleon to agree to the idea of marrying Holstein to Louis. And once Napoleon thought it was a good idea, anything Holstein or Louis felt about it ceased to matter. Surprisingly, a rumor started that Napoleon was the actual father of Holstein's upcoming child, and that the situation was arranged and encouraged by Josephine herself. More surprisingly, the rumor had stated that Napoleon's brothers, sisters, and in-laws who didn't want Louis' children to get special favor. The rumor was picked up by the British press with relish, who looked for every opportunity to mention the idea in print. Ew. In 1815, Napoleon was exiled to live on the island of St. Helena, around 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles off the coast of Angola in southwestern Africa. According to history, there is where he remained the rest of his life, dying there in 1821. But in 1911, a gentleman from France named M. Amourassa claimed to have proof that Napoleon had never gone to St. Helena in the first place. Amourassa asserted that a man named Francio Eugene Roberto, who has been for his strong physical resemblance to Napoleon, was sent into the area for Emperor's place. Napoleon himself grew a long beard and went to Verona, Italy, where he had a small shop that sold spectacles to British travelers. The true Napoleon died in 1823 while traveling to speak into the emperor's palace where his son sat as king. Being unwilling to identify or explain himself to the sentry that caught him, he was shot on the spot. While interrogating, the story requires a conspiracy that involves the very warden of Napoleon himself. An unlikely prospect, perhaps. It is also unlikely that a soldier who just happened to look like Napoleon was able to be so convincing and willing to play the part for at least 6 years of his life. Until his death. I don't think I could do that for any leader, Biden or Trump or whomever. I'd rather just be me. Another story. During Napoleon's campaign and reign, many stories were created by English people to turn public opinion in England against him. And while most have long since been forgotten, a few stories have lived on. In 1905, in particular, a creative example was published by Louis Goldsmith. According to Goldsmith, Napoleon was staying at his uncle's palace in Lyons prior to traveling to Italy. Napoleon was in the habit of having a cup of chocolate each morning, and one morning in particular, he received an anonymous note warning him not to drink the cup delivered to him. When the person brought the drink, Napoleon demanded the person who prepared it to be brought out, at which point the woman in question instead drank the remaining chocolate at that pot, then collapsed and started to have convulsions. Between the convulsions, she believed that she had been seduced by Napoleon. Between convulsions, she was revealed that she had been seduced by Napoleon when she was younger and had a born child from him and been completely forgotten by Napoleon as well. Hard life. Soon she expired, a victim of the poison she intended for Napoleon. The cook had been seen from the woman pour something from her pocket into the chocolate and therefore passed the warning to Napoleon. The cook was rewarded with a pension and an introduction into the Legion of Honor. Through uncertainty, the story likely led to a current belief that Napoleon was very fond of chocolate, and the fictitious relationship is still quoted as an example of the spurned over lover attempt to get revenge. Harsh. Last but not least, a surprising amount of Napoleon's hair survived the emperor's death. Historically speaking, it is known that 4 locks of his hair were given to the Bombay family, whom Napoleon had befriended during the exile of St. Helena. In addition, Napoleon bequeathed gold bracelets containing locks of his hair to a large number of his family and friends after his death. The fact that is some strange effects. One is that his authentic lock of hair from the family was used to test the theory of Napoleon had been victim of arsenic poisoning. Another effect, false locks. Napoleon's hair had been produced by a variety of con men for nearly 200 years and still go for $20,000 if suspected of being real. Undoubtedly, the most unexpected reality of his hair is that a Swiss watch manufacturer who bought locks of Napoleon's hair at auction announced in 2014 that we're now making watches that cost $10,000 each, and that each contain a single hair from Napoleon Bonaparte himself, hopefully the head of his hair and not his pubis area. So 200 years after Napoleon requested his hair to be made into bracelets from family and friends, now he can rejoice that it is in a bracelet, which is time itself, aka a watch. What do you think of Napoleon Bonaparte? Do you find it fascinating? Do you find him remarkable? Do you find him to be 6'5"? One other interesting aspect is his penis is in New Jersey, which on his dying bed, his doctor cut his penis off. The doctor was amazed at how small it was, which it was about 1.5 inches long. So if you're ever in New Jersey, please go find Napoleon Bonaparte's penis. You may find it extraordinary or quite emasculating, whoever you may be. Anyway, have a great day. Bye.